right, welcome back to the Phoenix Founders Podcast. I'm here with Josh Turley. I'm really excited about this episode. Josh has such an interesting story as a CEO, and I'm going to call you a refounder. And
I'm good with that.
You've refounded this company, I think, and what a great legacy here with RTA. Why don't we start with a quick introduction of who you are and what's the history? Who is RTA Fleet, and a little bit about the company, and then we'll kind of drill into some history and some background there.
Yeah. So I'm Josh Turley. I'm the CEO over at RTA. We call it the Fleet Success Company. We have a fleet management information system that we sell to like city of, county of, and we basically help them track all of their maintenance and repairs, as well as like the life cycle of the asset. So when do they acquire it? How much do they spend, depreciate, all that fun stuff until they actually disposition that asset. And the whole goal is to help them, obviously it's software, so save time, save money. Try to automate a lot of the old school paper processes and eliminate spreadsheets. So
I love it.
Yeah.
Classic vertical software company. We'll come back and drill down into a little bit about on the customer, the ideal customer profile, and some of the lessons there. But when did RTA Fleet start? And what's been at a high level, because we'll drill down into some detail around this, but at a high level, what's the history and the evolution of RTA Fleet?
Yeah, so we're probably one of the oldest software companies I know of. I think there was generations of software companies you kind of see, and we were in that first generation. It started in 1979.
Wow.
Yeah, so a little history of the company. My grandfather used to run the fleet for UPS, right? Like what can Brown do for you? And he started there as a driver, worked his way up, ended up running that entire fleet operation from about 1975 to 79. But in that time, he was an efficiency nut. And all through his career, he was like this, but he gets into the shop and basically they're trying to figure out how do we grow this fleet without growing the cost. So they go in and they start doing these time studies, and they're watching this mechanic as he goes around, and their biggest job that they had to do was replacing engines on these trucks. They'd come in and it would take somewhere between 12 and 14 hours to replace the engine on these trucks. They were simple engines too. Nothing like we see today, but anytime that happened, that meant that the truck was not only down when it had to get the engine replaced, but then it couldn't go out the next morning because it wasn't ready for routes. So they looked at that job and they watched this tech as he walks around walks around the vehicle and is, getting the engine. Then he goes over to the parts room and somebody steals his air hose and somebody's chatting with him all the time to the parts room. But then he makes that trip to the parts room 5 or 6 times, right? So a lot of what he did was kind of like Lean Six Sigma stuff before that really became prevalent in today's world. And they figured out how to get that job from 12 hours down to 6. And then they went on to the next job and the next job. Long story short is they were able to double the size of that fleet without hiring another technician.
Oh, wow.
And so from an efficiency standpoint, they were like 50%, 100% efficiency gains, I guess is the way to say that. And so his claim to fame was that he helped UPS save $100 million by avoiding having to hire all these technicians.
That's a good case study.
Super awesome. Yeah. So he gets out of UPS and starts consulting. People start hitting him up. Turley, come over and show me what you did. Show me all this stuff. And so that's kind of how we got started, was as a consulting company. He wrote a couple books, and he put in the back of these books these reports that he had used at UPS. But it was all manual. You'd have to fill it in with pencil paper, kind of like IRS forms. It was like, hey, I put this on line 39, carry this, divide that by 50, and then you get the end result at the end of the report. And somebody approached him and gave him the bright idea of like, you should hire some programmers and turn that into a computer program. So he did. So he hired a bunch of COBOL developers. This is 1981 about now, and they started working on the program. My dad was one of probably the 3rd or 4th COBOL developer that he hired. Oh, wow. Hired him out of ASU. He was, just going at ASU for computer engineering. And so he was a COBOL developer from the get-go. And that's how we got started. So
we're from the UPS story as kind of leading that group to the consulting practice, to the software practice, and even today. Is the North Star metric mostly the same thing, like more fleet utilization, like lower costs of administering the fleet? Like, is that the kind of primary objective that's been the case for 45, 50 years? Here?
Efficiency, right? Yeah. It's in the DNA, is just how do we make this process faster? How do we eliminate this process altogether? And any time that we're building software, it really comes back to how is this helping them save time and save money? There's really not a whole lot else you can do. You can make better decisions, and that's really, you boil it back down. And why do you want to make better decisions? So you can save time and save money. Yeah. Especially if we're dealing with public fleets, it's all about dollars saved versus profits earned. So we're not really pushing like, how do we generate more revenue or surplus? It's really, how do we be efficient stewards of the taxpayer dollar?
Yeah.
So,
So interesting. Tell me about when your dad got involved. What was one of the things I really want to kind of drill down on, or the lessons learned? I started at the top of the show calling you a refounder.
Yeah.
And I think in these family businesses that have multiple successful successions, like you've gone from grandpa to dad to you, there's so many lessons learned around that. What was the succession from grandpa to your dad, and then fast forward to dad to you?
Yeah. And well, in third generation, like, I think I'm supposed to ruin the company. That was my role, was supposed to destroy the company. So from dad, it was interesting is that grandpa was not a computer guy. And so, 82, dad starts. By 85, grandpa realizes that one of the developers was selling code and time on the side to one of our customers, which was obviously not okay. And he just loses it. He's like, I am done with this. I don't like computer developers. They're all prima donnas, which, like, we work with these people so we can understand. And I'm a technical founder, so I consider myself that way too. But he's just like, I'm done. I want to go back to consulting. Larry, if you want this, then it's yours to run. And so they worked out a deal. I want to say my dad bought it from grandpa for $80,000. And, we used to be Ron Turley and Associates. That was kind of how we got started. And when grandpa left, there was no more Ron Turley, so it became the Ron Turley Associates, almost like the Beatles without John and Paul, right? You can't call them that, but so that's how we got our name, was Ron Turley Associates, and they let him use the name, and he gave him all the source code. And dad, basically, they moved it. I actually have a picture of this. I showed all my new employees. Grandpa's other passion was building houses, and so grandpa built his house, and then he helped my dad build his house right next door. So when it came time to succession, they literally moved it out of grandpa's garage and into dad's garage right next door.
Literally a business running out of the garage.
Totally, yeah. And they fired everybody. Dad started over with my mom and a family friend, and that's literally what they did.
Wow.
It wasn't cash flow positive, so they actually had a whole nother product that they were selling at the time. If you remember back then, like, printing was not an easy thing to solve, and so they had a whole print client they developed for Novell Networks. Called Hot Print. And so they were using that in the morning to basically cash flow RTA in the afternoons. They split their time between those until RTA became solvent. But yeah, that was kind of their succession, was just, dad wanted to keep it going. He wanted a career in software. That's what he went to school for. And, just sold it for the rights, essentially, and moved it.
And this was probably like early to mid 80s when that happened. 85.
Yeah,
okay.
In fact, I was born probably right at that time or just before that.
So you grew up around this business. You probably saw this business like up close and personal all through, certainly high school at least.
Yeah, I'd say from a different perspective. I wasn't in it. We'd come in, and things like we would do as kids we'd help clean the office. We were cheap child labor that we could get away with using. I would go and build chairs, like in high school. I built office equipment. When I got a little bit smarter, I learned how to put together computers and things like that. And so I would build PCs for the developers. I'd spec them out and all that, and like, hey, this is what we need, Dad. And I would build them, which was a lot of fun for me. But I wasn't involved in the business side of it, and I couldn't tell you one iota thing about Fleet, didn't know anything about table structure, databases, any of that stuff as a high schooler. I just knew that Dad had a software business, and that's, kind of how we made money. My perspective as a kid, though, was interesting is, I always knew that he had to travel for work, and I don't know that I resented him for it, but I definitely, whenever he wasn't there, like the childhood situation wasn't amazing, because him and Mom ended up getting divorced, but I just remember that piece of it was the sacrifice that he had to make as a founder. So kind of going through that lens of it and just seeing what this was. I remember I was in third grade, and I knew that my dad was a programmer, and I knew he worked at wherever. And for some reason, I could have sworn he worked at Microsoft, right? And to find out that he didn't work at Microsoft was just so disheartening, because everybody wanted to work at Microsoft back then. Windows 95 was all the rage, right? This is all the things. And so,
you're like, Dad, you're building a company, but you're such a disappointment because you don't work at Microsoft.
Right? Yeah, it was really funny, because I had no idea what the kind of journey he was on, and just how brave he had to be, like as a founder, what he was really going through building his own company. So it was interesting. And you talk about the transition from him to me, much more bumpy, right? So that wasn't a clean, he fired everybody, so he had a nice clean slate to work with. In his case, it's 2014. I guess we'll go back 3 months. 2013, he ends up getting diagnosed with leukemia.
Oh, wow.
There's no succession plan in place. And so he starts going in for treatment. 3 months later, he gets out of the hospital. It was basically a week of hospice, and then he's gone.
So was he like in his 40s at the time or something?
He 52.
52. Okay.
Yeah. So very quickly diagnosed, and he'd been dealing with it for a year. He just had never gotten it diagnosed and didn't know it. We probably could have caught it sooner and all that stuff, but it is what it is. It turns into that. So here it is, 2014, February, and we've got to figure out like who's running this thing, who's in charge, how do we get this going? My stepmom was, she inherited all the shares, right? So it just transferred over to her. Even went through probate. So I would, if you do own a software company, like I'd get a good estate lawyer first and foremost, and make sure that your estate's all set up really nicely so that it goes through a trust and all the shares are there. So you don't have to deal with courts and probate and all that stuff. Thankfully we were able to kind of get around that, but it was not something that I'd recommend for people.
Well, that's something, you never anticipate in a closely held company. You just don't think about it.
Yeah. And they had a whole buy-sell agreement with some of the other officers and things like that. But that was a total toxic situation as well that had deteriorated over the years. And so that's another lesson I looked at with Dad, is that he trusted his employees implicitly, but not always for good reason, so there was a lot of people that he hired that I probably would have never hired, that you should never hire. We had some people, there was fraud that got committed, and these are people he gave a chance to and gave an opportunity to, and they totally took advantage of his generosity. If I had one thing watching him over the years, is he was an incredibly generous and loving boss. His people were deathly loyal to him, except for when they weren't. Yeah. And when they weren't, they violated that trust to no ends. It was really incredible to kind of watch them throw it away.
Gosh, what an interesting succession for you then, because like a tragic event of your father passing. Did your stepmom work in the business, or did she inherited the business? Did she inherit was she working in the business before? No. Well, that's also hard too, right?
Yeah. So we'll talk about that. So she had worked in the business a little bit as like a receptionist. It was a funny story. We joke about it with her now. She actually got fired as a receptionist because she was struggling with her own stuff and couldn't show up to work. But, this time though, she'd been in the business for about 6 months before the diagnosis, just kind of helping with some administrative duties at the office. So she gets thrust into this position and now has a company that she needs to figure out how to run. And so she comes in and her whole mantra is, well, I'm the CEO, but all that stands for is cheerleader for everyone in the office. We had at the time, the COO, who'd been with us maybe about 20 some odd years. He got promoted to president. And then I had stepped in, and I was a young kid. I just got my master's degree from ASU, and I became like the VP of system development. So I was over engineering and customer service, which are the two departments that I grew up in. So I was ready to handle those. But you basically had this three-headed management monster that was trying to run this company. One of the biggest challenges we had, because there wasn't a good, clear succession plan, and frankly, we had just gotten used to the way that Dad used to run things. And my dad, his whole philosophy was, we're not going to get rich, we're going to be comfortable. And as long as we do a little bit better than we did last year, then that's fine. So it's very lifestyle business, a laissez-faire, country club atmosphere, if you want to call it that. We didn't fire people, and we didn't inspire him to quit either. It was just like he demanded loyalty above anything else. So here we are, fast forwarding to now, we've got this three-headed management monster, and we can't make any changes without kind of violating the ethos. Mm-hmm. And the question always came in is, well, what would Larry want to do? And how would he handle this situation? And both my mom and the COO at the time, very risk averse. So it's all about status quo. How do we just maintain and keep going?
And you wanted to go build something. You're like, totally. Hey, let's go.
A young kid out of college, I knew that there was a better way to do things. I'd seen it. I've been watching all these other startups that were just blossoming. And here we have this software company that's just stuck because we don't want to make the hard decisions and we're not willing to make the sacrifices we need. One of our big projects at the time, this tells you how loyal Dad was to his people. We needed to get off the COBOL platform. He had somehow, we had gotten from, an old green screen, numbered menu, keyboard driven application written in COBOL to a Windows-based application still written in COBOL. So the same primary business logic was all in there, but we just wrote a GUI layer on top of it using COBOL GUI. It's all spaghetti. But instead of saying, okay, it's time for us to replatform, we need to rewrite like our competitors had done, he went out and found a way using, I don't even know what the company was called, as IS COBOL or something like that, but to take the COBOL code and turn it into Java bytecode and then run it in a JVM. And this was his dream, was we're going to take this and move it over, and then I don't have to fire any of my developers, and I don't have to go hire new ones, and I can retain them, and they have all this industry knowledge, and it's just
not have to learn a new language.
Yeah. And I don't have to let go of these people that I love and care about.
Yeah.
Right. And I appreciated the sentiment, but there comes a time when you're really just trying to do the wrong thing for the wrong reasons. And in this case, we had, COBOL code trying to run inside of a JVM, which on its surface sounds ludicrous, because it was.
And this is like 2014, 15.
This is 2015. Yeah. The modern, Ruby and
AWS,
JavaScript.
AWS has probably been around 7 or 8 years. Azure's probably been around
the iPhone launched 7 years prior, right? We are well past that.
Yeah.
And so that was actually one of my first challenges, was to figure out that project and what we were doing with that. I had written it when I was going through my master's at ASU. I had written a transformation program for RTA. We won the best applied project because it was probably the most realistic,
right?
Because it was grounded in reality of we're actually dealing with this right now. But instead of trying to go and build a web version of our product, I said, hey, why don't we just go build a mobile version of this? And so I pitched this whole thing, and we ended up executing that plan. It just took 3 years for somebody to finally get on board with that.
Yeah.
Which, we'll fast forward when I finally did buy the company. But so we have this 3-headed management monster. Status quo reigns the day. And anytime we wanted to make a change, it was just kind of emotionally hard for the president and for mom, because Larry wouldn't do it that way. Even fast forward, when I finally had the company, I still had that same issue, but it was less for me and it was more for the people. Is every time we made a change or pushed a change, it was a little bit of Larry died more.
Yeah.
And so that part of the transition, we could have mapped that out a lot better. Dad's parting words to mom, this was his advice. This is the whole succession plan in a nutshell. When Josh is ready, then, he wanted me to run it.
Yeah.
And she says, well, how will I know he's ready? And he says, I don't know. I don't know. So they didn't have really a career ladder. They didn't have a guidebook or a metric or rubric on how to know that I was ready. I finally did take over as CEO in 2015 though. And one of the first things that I did was put us on a budget. We had never been on a budget before.
First budget the
company has ever had in their life, right? And I knew that coming out of college, and I had hired a couple mentors. Oddly enough, it was the same mentors that Dad had hired. They stuck around. They're like, well, hey, we really loved your dad. We'd love to help you too. But what was funny about it is he never listened to him. They'd give him all this advice, and he's like, okay, Fred, whatever. But they would go and do something different.
He valued the mentor relationship, but not the content he got from the mentors.
Yeah. I'm sure they gave him good advice that he did follow, but there were several times, Fred would tell me, he's like, dude, I told your dad this so many times. And he just was like, I know. Oh, and I finally figured out this problem that I had with one of my VPs.
Yeah.
It was really hilarious just listening to some of the stories. It's like, oh my gosh, that's terrible.
So this time frame, you became the CEO in 2015, inside of a year after your dad died?
Just over. So this was July, I want to say, or August of 15.
So another really critical and tough transition. You didn't own the company yet, though. That was a few years later that you.
No, I like to say I was a CEO, but I had pink fuzzy handcuffs on because I could only move and operate within what Mom was willing to do. And anytime I wanted to make a big change, it was Larry was really passionate about that. So it's difficult to make changes without killing a little bit of my dad.
Yeah.
Especially in the company, especially when it came to people. That was probably the biggest challenge that I had, was overcoming the people discussion. And, when you think about building a company, oftentimes, I use the title from Dan Sullivan's book, which is Who, Not How.
Yeah.
And so it really comes down to the people. And if you can't get the right people on the bus, it doesn't matter where the bus is going. It's not going to go very far. And we struggled with that for a long time. We did a whole button a seat, warm body test. If you wanted to get on, then that's how you'd come in and we'd get those. But, interestingly, so this was my challenge though, is that the people we did have, they've been with us 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
Really long time, long tenured. In fact, at 10 years, right? So in 2014, I'd been there 10 years, and I was probably one of the most junior employees of the company, which just tells you how kind of status quo and set in the trenches. It's probably the one thing when you talk about turnover, there is such a thing as too little turnover in my mind, because I lived it. Yeah. And what ends up happening is the company gets stagnant and complacent. It's like a pond, like a musky pond.
Oh yeah.
Without fresh water coming in, it dies. And you just get this really, it gets acrid, it's bacteria, it's just moldy and all that. And so you need fresh blood coming in because you need new ideas, you need new perspectives. Instead of asking like, well, why don't we do it this way? People just get complacent and they start accepting like, well, we've always done it that way. And this is just the process, and they get comfortable.
I have an opinion on the answer to my question I'm about to ask. But what's the opposite of complacency, by the way? Like if you were trying to replace complacency, what did you want the tone and the tenor of the company to be if you were trying to get rid of complacency?
Hunger.
Hunger.
Yeah. So
I was going to use the word urgency, but I like hunger.
Yeah. Because it implies the same, right?
Yeah.
It's, there's like a sense of urgency of like, we need to move, we need to go.
We need to win, right?
Yeah. And this might segue, we might come back to this, but when I talk about the core values, the one core value that we were missing that we have now is hunger. And so that's why it's easy for me to grab that word.
Well, let's segue to that now. So so over the next few years, you've taken the CEO reins, but over the next few years, I think you kind of consolidate ownership and take ownership here. Is that when you went through the refounding of like rethinking purpose, mission, and values? Was it like 2017, 2018, 2019 timeframe?
Yeah. So, and that was an interesting transition too. Let's come back to that one.
Okay. Yeah.
So 2016, I go to buy the company. And this is something that you'll want to, if you're trying to think about transitioning to, later ownership and things like that. My relationship with my stepmom at the time was not in a good spot. And my wife's relationship with my stepmom was even worse.
Yeah.
So here we are, we're trying to buy the company, and, like with her and her lawyers and everything like that, we end up trying to go through some crazy post-nup to kind of like ice Ange out of the deal, my wife out of the deal, where she would take on all the risk, but get none of the reward.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we had the advice of like, you need to go get lawyers, and Josh, you have to have a separate lawyer from your wife.
Yeah.
So because of this post-nup deal, and her lawyer, which I'll bless him to this day, was like, absolutely not. Hell no. There's no way you're signing this deal. And so we turned it down, and we actually were about to walk away from, buying the company at the time. Cooler heads prevailed. We got new attorneys, and a year later, I finally bought the company. And that's when those pink fuzzy handcuffs broke. And it was just like, all right, let's go. And it was all about, for me, figuring out who do I hire. And so I hired a CTO from Microsoft. I hired a marketer. We hired a couple of engineers. They were web engineers, and it was kind of off to the races.
Like most of the executive team is either new or gets replaced or up-leveled or something like that in that kind of time frame.
And I've probably gone through that phase 2 or 3 times. Like I think I'm on version 3 right now of my executive team. So,
one thing that was surprising to me in my own founder journey was how much energy it takes. It's just when you start a company, you don't think about that.
Yep.
But like how much energy it takes to rebuild the executive team.
Yeah.
Tell me what were some of the lessons learned. You've done that a few times. Oh, I don't want to miss what we talked about.
I'm going to hit this. Actually, this is perfect.
Good.
So the first thing that I had to learn was how much culture matters. So my first go at hiring executives, I was looking at skill set only. I wanted people who knew how to do the job, that knew it better than I did. But that was really where I stopped. And it took me a couple years to realize how important it was for me to get aligned on culture.
And when you say culture, I think what you mean, don't let me put words in your mouth, but I think you mean values.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yeah. And that's like when we talk about culture, that's the whole thing we talk about. Now I will broaden that definition because it really is about creating clarity around what we call like our purpose, our values, and then our mission.
Right.
And that's the vision. If you're a Jim Collins fanatic like I am, that comes from Collins and Porras and Built to Last. But the thing that we weren't aligned on was the values by any stretch of the imagination. And so I had a lot of people on the team that they didn't align with my personal values, but I wasn't clear about what those values were. And so I was hiring left and right. Again, I was kind of making the same mistakes Dad did. I was just hiring more expensive people that were more competent, but they still had the same issue, and they were difficult to work with, and it was toxic. So that took me a couple years to figure that out. It took me a couple years during that same time to figure out how to hold people accountable in the different disciplines, because I didn't know these disciplines. I didn't come up in sales. I came up in CS and on the tech side. So I knew how to have great conversations with my CTO, but to hold a sales leader accountable, the only thing I knew was numbers. I couldn't tell you why his numbers sucked or why the marketing pipeline wasn't great. Yep. But I could see the end of the day what it was. And so in some ways they were easier to hold accountable, but I couldn't coach them. And you have to have the right people on board in order to be able to coach them and you got to teach yourself. You have to raise your lid. It's
interesting. What you're kind of pointing out here, I've seen this lesson having done a lot of these interviews and in my own journey. It's easy to think that I just need to hire people that know this function better than I do, which is true.
Yes.
But what you're also highlighting is you also have to actually get into those functions and understand those functions, not so you can micromanage, but so you can be a good partner or or at least be knowledgeable about those activities those people are doing. Is that kind of what you're
Totally.
striving?
I absolutely believe that your executives should be coming to you and making recommendations. They should be the ones telling you what to do, right?
Yeah.
Hey, we should do this, and here's why. And you should be able to be, in my case, it's the discerner, right? You're there to kind of vet out the good ideas and the bad ideas and be the sounding board to kind of push back and challenge them. But if you don't have any confidence or competence in an area, you're not going to be able to. You're just going to go with the flow. And you're going to say, okay, well, you know better than I do. I'm going to defer to you.
I also think that's pretty uninspiring for the people we lead.
Oh, totally.
Like if we're curious about sales and sales management, it's inspiring to the salespeople that report to us as founders. I think that's an important thing that gets missed by a lot of founders is knowing these building this functional competence really helps create those relationships with the functional leaders we lead.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, as a CEO, Clayton talks about this all the time. Clayton Mask over at Keep, that your job as a CEO is just an exercise in letting go of control.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to learn.
Easier to say than do.
Totally. At the same time, you can't let go of all the control because that's just abdication. And so I often tell my team is, delegation is not abdication. And in the case where you do that, where you bring on an executive who knows all the things and you just abdicate and say, okay, you got it, take it. That's not delegation. You're not delegating ownership. Like you still are the final check, you're the signature on the final line. You got to make sure that you understand what's going on so you can hold them accountable, so you can push and challenge and ask those questions so that you make the best decisions.
I love that takeaway. Delegation is not abdication. I love that.
And we mistake those two all the time.
Yeah.
So coming back to the values, we were really unclear about what our values were. And 2018 was probably my toughest year. So 2018, this is the year that I got to make all of my dumb decisions as a CEO. And the problem wasn't the decisions themselves. They were the right decisions. I just made them too quickly, too close together. So the first one I did was, hey, let's go hire a bunch of expensive web developers. We'd never hired web developers like this. There were mid 6-figure salaries. Every one of our COBOL developers was sub 6. They were 5-digit salaries, very different type of engineer. And I went out and hired 2 of them without really looking at the cash flow model to see, could I afford this? And I could, because I had cash, because I'd been on a budget, and all of a sudden we had all these reserves piling up. We never had a budget before. We'd never have profits. We never, because Dad would just spend it as soon as it came in. He didn't want to pay anything in taxes. So that was his whole strategy. So here we are, we've got cash reserves. I'm like, all right, perfect. I want to put this to use, right? So I at least had the presence of mind to deploy the capital. And we get in, I hire those 2. And as we're interviewing for more engineers, I'm looking around the building, and it's just kind of this old, like dark cherry woods and mahogany everywhere. It looked like a lawyer's office or a doctor's office. It is not an up-and-coming tech company.
Yep.
And so I was like, well, we need to remodel the building. Oh, and by the way, we're expanding, so we need more space. So we decided to do a whole TI project in the building we own and move into the suite next door. So that was a huge cash drain that I hadn't planned. Mm-hmm. So I'm doing those 2 things simultaneously. And I thought it would be an amazing idea because I kept hearing about SaaS. I just read Consumption Economics and Technology as a Service, right, which are 2 terrific books.
Yeah.
And decided, let's go. So I flipped our entire sales model from a perpetual license sales model to a SaaS sales model, which if you know anything about, there's like a 3-year cliff, and you got to get through this, this gorge of hell to get over to the other side.
Because you had upfront license payments with like roughly probably 20% maintenance streams or something like that was sort of the standard for those people that don't know back in the day. And then so going to subscription, you don't have the big pop up front in maintenance, or in license, but you have presumably like higher.
You have higher, so it's not 20%. You're trying to go like Adobe and Microsoft, I think, shot for 33 to 40%.
Yeah.
But it was, like you missed a 60% hit on year 1.
It's definitely a cash.
And you're hoping to get it. Yeah. It's a huge cash drain to make that flip.
Yeah.
But the beauty is like you can see the other side of the cliff and the mountain that's higher.
Yeah.
Right. Because now you're just dealing with retention, and it's much easier to retain than it is to, go out and acquire new. And like the SaaS model just makes total sense.
Yeah.
But you got to get to it first.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand that.
So that was like 2018 was pretty rough. So that probably means 2019 was a rebuild year of sorts. Yeah. I'm guessing.
Well, so I'm going to end with 2018. It's Christmas, and we have $50,000 in the bank. And I've got payroll coming up on Friday, and it's $180,000 nut. And I have no idea how we're going to make that work. And that was the point that I think like I was ready to quit. I realized I'd bit off more than I could chew. I didn't know what I was doing. And even with my mentors helping me along the way, they weren't SaaS people. They didn't understand that. And I was lost. So we get through it by some, I call it the grace of God. Like, it was a miracle. We get through it. And then we go and I end up getting invited to Dave Ramsey's EntreLeadership. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there in that room, right? And Dave Ramsey gets up. And I don't know if you've ever listened to Ramsey speak, but he's a preacher. Like,
he's a preacher. He's definitely a preacher.
He's got that Southern Bible thumping fire, right? And so he gets up and he's talking about Winston Churchill and this whole concept of never quit, right? He's got YouTube videos of this. You should go watch it. But he gets up there and he's just like, talking about Winston Churchill and never surrender. We're going to fight them on the beaches and on the streets and on the, like wherever the Germans are coming through, we're going to fight them. And he says, never give up, never quit. Never quit. And this is Dave Ramsey. So he's like yelling into the microphone, never quit, never. And I'm just sitting there just melting because I was about to quit. I was like, I think I might be done. Like, I was having anxiety. I was having panic attacks. I was checking myself into the hospital. I went to the hospital 3 times like the week prior. And I came out just feeling so energized that I was not going to quit. I was going to see this thing all the way through.
I love that.
Interestingly, this is a total segue. When we're going to talk a little bit about, like we just raised a Series A. Yeah. One of the Series A investors came out and he's talking to the company. He was like, he was going through his CRM notes. And I talked to Josh in 2018.
Oh, wow.
Right after this, right before this transition, right? And he's like, this company's not going to make it. So it's total full circle. Here he comes, and it's 7 years later, and now they're an investor in the company.
That's so fascinating.
It was totally like, yes, it was validation. And I just remember that moment sitting in that conference room when Dave Ramsey's like literally speaking to my soul. Never quit, never give up, keep going.
Just to drill down on one point, because this really resonates with me, having had a similar experience. You're short $130,000 for payroll. You got 50, and I need 180 to fund payroll that I owe my employees. Like, what did you, just in that moment of time, what did you actually do?
Well, we ramped up our collections efforts. We looked to see if there's any bills that we could float for at least a little while. Some of them we couldn't, and we just did it anyways.
When in doubt, stick it to your vendors. Is that what you're
exactly saying? Right. Especially the construction vendors, which was unfortunate, and I wouldn't recommend it, but between them and your employees, like, absolutely pick your employees first. Yeah. You got to dance with the people that brought you. We hit the credit cards. We had a little bit of a line of credit left, so we tapped that. I mean, we maxed every resource we could. Yeah. Thankfully, I didn't have to hit personal credit cards, but that would have been my next step. Yeah. I was going, personal and all that. What's ironic about that is that Dad, for all those years that he's talked about being comfortable and not getting rich, but being comfortable, he would do the same thing. He would just float his paycheck. He just wouldn't cash it. He'd write a cash check and then he wouldn't cash it for 3-4 weeks, which always made Christmas really interesting.
A founder's salary is often the primary cash flow mechanism in small businesses. Yeah.
What was ironic about that? This is a totally different story, but the founder's salary is that when he died in 2014, like, we should have had a lot more cash. Mm-hmm. We didn't, because we weren't on a budget. And, we ended up finding like some crazy fraud where somebody was padding their paycheck a little bit using Dad's money. Oh, wow. Essentially, they just redirected it into their own paycheck and then just went crazy with it. But I got us on a budget, and I didn't have access to QuickBooks. I didn't have access to any of this stuff, so I wouldn't have been able to find it. But I put us on a budget, and that immediately stopped it. And like, all of a sudden, wow, look at all this. We ended up being so cash flow positive in 2015, blew everybody's minds how on earth that could have happened. And revenues didn't really go up. Yeah. Like, revenues from 14 to 15 were pretty flat because we were just holding status quo. Like, it was, don't rock the boat, don't do anything crazy. So I call those kind of like the years of hell. Like, they're just, years of purgatory that we were going through.
Yeah. I'm loving the chronology here, and I want to kind of fast forward through to today, but I don't want to miss the point on.
Let's hit 2018. So we're fast forwarding through that.
Was that the year you did the purpose, mission, and values work? Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure.
So at Dave Ramsey's event, Patrick Lencioni gets up on stage.
I love him.
He's an amazing guy. And this is like, I've got a master's degree from ASU. I've got 2 bachelor's degrees from ASU, and I love those programs. They were worth it. Patrick Lencioni has a box set, cost you $250. That is worth 5 of those degrees. Yeah. So I'm listening to him speak. I've never heard him speak before, and he's talking about this concept of ideal team player, and it blew my mind. And I was like, this is what we're missing. Is I hadn't been hiring for culture fit. I hadn't been hiring for values, and I didn't understand what it took to be an ideal team player. So I go back to the office, and I'm looking at Dad's bookshelf, And this is really when things flipped for us. As I'm looking at his bookshelf and I see 3 books on the shelf from Patrick Lencioni.
Never seen him before.
He's never read them. I've never seen him before. He never cracked them open. I just think of all the heartache we could have avoided if he just implemented this stuff. But so I crack them open, right? It's 5 Temptations of a CEO, 4 Obsessions of an Extraordinary Executive, and then 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
Yep.
And I read all 3 of those, and 5 Dysfunctions of a Team completely changed my life as a leader and really changed the direction of the company. I read that and immediately was like, we're all on board this. And then I went out and bought Ideal Team Player because that was the talk I just listened to, and that was what revolutionized the company. Is I had to get comfortable with conflict, I had to get comfortable with commitment, holding people accountable, and then I could focus on the results, and I was doing them out of order.
Yeah, I love all that.
So that's what got us started on the journey. We got really clear about our core values, which are humble, hungry, and smart. I literally took them right out of Ideal Team Player. And then we made them our own. We kind of crafted our own messaging around it, what it means for us and what we look for. And then we started applying them kind of in retro. Somebody was asking me about that today, is how we transitioned from Dad's company to my company with those core values and how hard did I have to push? And I went slow. I probably went way too slow on it. But it was like, hey, this is what we are. And so we'd have these like little gentle conversations. Okay, that's not really being humble. That's not really being hungry. That's not people smart at all. And fast forward a couple of years, 2021, I've been preaching humble, hungry, smart for 3 years now, or 2 years now. We just come back from COVID. Everybody's come back to the office because we did our RTO like immediately as soon as we could. And I realized that not everybody's bought in. Like they haven't all bought into the mission. They haven't bought into the purpose, and they haven't bought into our values. So I get up on stage at a staff meeting and I say, look, I need to know that everybody's here for the right reasons. And so what I'm going to do, you all know what we're talking about. You know where this train is headed, but you have got to get on the train. You cannot stand on the platform anymore and hold the doors open. If this isn't the train for you, it's totally fine. There's another train coming 5 minutes behind me, and it's probably going to a destination you want. But right now, this is the train, and this is where we're headed. So if you're on, you're on. And here's what I'm going to do to make this a little easier for you. As I wrote a check for everybody, a live payroll check for 10% of their annual salary. Gave it to them on a Friday. Says, I want you to think about this over the weekend and how much you really want to be here. And if you're willing to turn down 10% of your salary to stay here, right? Like this could be your final check. It could be like a bonus, whatever you want to call it. But if you're still here on Monday, come in, let me know, and we'll tear up the check together. Right?
Well,
I'll know you're here.
I have to ask, how many took the deal?
One.
I
had 35 employees and only one of them took it. Now I would tell you, there's probably about 5 or 10 more that should have taken it.
Yeah.
One guy even had the audacity to come up and he's like, Josh, it's just not enough to tempt me, which is just super like, oh, don't challenge me to a good time. So the very next staff meeting, I come back and I was like, look, somebody else said that this wasn't enough money, so let's double it up. Oh, wow. I'm going to offer everybody 20% to quit right now. And nobody took me up on that deal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's real emotional buy-in if you can get people to do that. Was there one thing, was it hungry? Was that the main thing that was missing for you? You were like, hey, we got to level up. Was it the hunger?
I would say as a company, for sure, that was the one thing that was lacking was hunger. The secondary thing I think was lacking, and everybody had a different struggle when I look at the original 25 that were part of Dad's company. Yeah. But the biggest one was definitely hunger. People smart, there was definitely some people on the team who struggled with people smart. I had some people on the team who really struggled with humble. And so it was very interesting as we kind of sussed that out. But if you fast forward, so 25 years ago, not 25 years ago, in 2014, there was 25 employees.
Yep.
And of those 25 employees, we're at almost employee number 90 now. There's only 4 of us left, including me. So like we went through a full osmosis to kind of clean out the bad blood, bring in the new blood.
It's a totally different company.
Completely different company now. Yeah. And that was probably one of the biggest things I had to learn as you talk about succession. There was a moment where I had to recognize that this was no longer Dad's company, that this was my company. And I needed to take ownership of that. I wasn't just running his company. This wasn't like I was carrying on his legacy. I was doing this for me. And I will say it probably happened very shortly after or around the same time I was at Entree Leadership with Ramsey.
Wow.
But that was a big unlock for me. Because as soon as that happened, then it was like, I have permission. I'm giving myself permission to blow things up and to do things and to fire people that he would have never fired. That was probably another thing when you talk about how did I get through it. Very quickly after that, in January of 19, we did a round of layoffs. This is the only layoff I've ever done. And I should have terminated a lot of those people just for performance, but I let the finances dictate the decision. And I think when I look back and regret, that's something I really do regret, is that I let it be a financial layoff instead of a performance based. And
that would have been a better signal to the rest of the team.
Totally.
Yeah.
It absolutely would have had a much better impact on the rest of the team. The culture would have gone a lot faster if I had just had the courage to let go of some of these longtime employees because they weren't what we were trying to build. Instead of like getting forced into a corner was like, I don't have a choice and now I have to pick. Yeah. It's clear which ones I'm going to pick is the ones that I want to bet on in the future. And I would go back and do that differently.
So, gosh, there's so many amazing, I'll say founder, but also leadership, CEO, succession, transition lessons and everything you said.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the financing of the company, and you're like the oldest company to ever do a Series A, like in the history
I believe
of this. I'm sure there's one older, but it's indicative. That's actually indicative of kind of what you've built and what you continue to build. But anything, before we talk about the financing, anything else like through the 2022, 2023, 2024 timeframe that we don't want to miss in the story here?
Yeah, I'd say just, the over the other side of this, which is that replatforming that Dad kind of started us on, I'll say in like 2008-ish, 9-ish. By 2015, I knew that was a total non-starter. And so I had set a little tripwire that if we couldn't get this thing performant by October of this date, that we were done and we were going to go a different direction. So we abandoned that project, and then starting in 2016 is when I started like, okay, we need to build a new web platform. And we went on a lot of different zigzags on that. So that was really tough. Is just, we needed a lot clearer direction, and I wasn't confident in myself, and I didn't have a good CTO until much later to kind of help me with that. But here we are, 2021, we end up making another change at the CTO position. He goes to Amazon. And so I backfill him with a guy that used to work over at Nextiva, and just, it's been a game changer ever since then. We got really clear about the direction and how we were replatforming. And so we did a fun little hybrid strategy. We still have our old school classic COBOL GUI with a SQL Server database. And then we are basically building from the ground up a modern web app that shares the same database. And so it allowed us to kind of build side by side, like kind of sidecar it. To the point that now this sidecar actually has a motor on its own, and here in about a year and a half, we're going to be able to decouple those completely, sunset Dad's product, and our new, we call it Fleet 360, the web-based platform will just run on its own, and that'll be the future of the company.
I'm sure to a lot of people listening, that sounds like, gosh, why did it take so long? Why, all that, but your customer base is pretty averse to change.
So averse.
And so, like, I think a lot of people don't have an appreciation. You started off by saying we sell to cities and counties. And what's amazing about those customers, they're hard to win, but when you win, they're highly retentive.
Massive.
But they also don't want you to mess with their kind of workflows a lot of times as well, right?
And even now, like, we're having discussions about, hey, like, this is, 30-year-old technology you guys are using. It's time to move. Just the amount of support that goes into that. For us, it's actually getting deprecated. Pieces of it are being deprecated.
Right.
We can't keep supporting it and maintain a secure environment.
Right.
So we're having these conversations with them, and they're like, yeah, but we really love how this works. And we're like, okay, but have you even checked this out? Have you trained on it? Have you looked at it? Because it's
everything you want is over here.
Yeah, and you can use them both simultaneously. So the cutover for this is like as smooth as it could possibly be. Yeah. You could literally train one person at a time in your company on the new product and do a really slow phased rollout. But they just don't want to do it.
That's a really good example of meeting your customers where they are. But you also have had really good success at the conversion. Like
totally.
Like a significant majority of, I think, your customers are now on the kind of new platform.
Or very in the middle of transitioning. They're moving over as quickly as possible because they see it. And we have in our industry, there's an influx of new, younger talent, and so kind of the old school fleet managers are retiring.
Right.
And in their place are people that came up on smartphones and web apps, and so they're expecting this now. Yeah. Whereas, the older school, it's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, but this is how I used to use it in 1990. This is what I expect. Yeah. And so it's interesting to see how that's shifting.
So I'd love to spend the last 5 minutes talking about not just this capital raise, but, I know you well enough to know you wouldn't raise capital if you didn't have a big plan here on what's ahead. So I want to make sure we look forward here. Any last lessons on leadership you want to share? And otherwise, we'll start looking forward here.
No, I think that, we've kind of covered the bulk of it, right? Is just get really clear on your purpose, your values, your mission, hire for it. That's probably the one thing I think people chintz on is just they're not clear in their hiring process about what they're looking for. And so making sure that your entire team is on the same page, that they're reading out of the same music. And so we have questions that we ask around Humble, Hungry, and People Smart. And, you're not just looking for competency. You need competency. Don't get me wrong. We probably skewed a little bit too heavy that way at first, but now I feel like we're right down the middle. But making sure the whole team is aligned with what the culture looks like, and reject fiercely, because it's too hard. Once crazy's in the building, it's hard to get it out.
That's for sure.
So just be judicious with that. And you as the CEO, you set the tone, and you've got to own that.
Yeah.
So
chemotherapy is not successful all the time, so you got to keep the cancer out to begin with.
Yes.
Let's talk about the fundraise. I mean, this is so interesting. So you did a recent raise from an investor, and we had the good fortune of being a small co-investor in this round. But you raised from someone that I consider to be just a tier one growth equity investor.
Yeah.
Someone that's been tracking you obviously for 7 years here, and knowing your business for that long. What's the tell me why you decided to raise capital, and what are you trying to build on a go forward basis, and what's the future here? So tell me a little bit how that came about, and then what's ahead for RTA.
Yeah. So we had done a debt round last year, and just had a small amount of debt that we went out and brought, and that was partly because traditional banks don't have any idea how to work with SaaS companies.
Yep.
And so thanks to some connections, we got a nice little deal with Recurring Capital, who's amazing. That's a fantastic venture debt fund. But we knew we were at a pivotal point that we could keep kind of doing this bootstrap thing and refinance the debt or go get more debt if we wanted to. We were growing at a healthy clip. But we had a pretty significant demand for, especially on the engineering side, to try to get through this next phase of migration and getting all the code parity. I mean, you're talking about a 45-year-old product, and trying to rewrite it in a web-based product is not a cheap feat.
Yep.
So we had some major financial needs there. So we started exploring, okay, how else can we do this? Well, we could go and refinance. We could go get a bigger note, which probably would have been, it's certainly a lot cheaper. If you're getting anywhere from a 10 to 20% interest rate, that's not terrible if you consider what the cost of equity is, right? Equity is always the most expensive form of capital.
For sure.
And I say that knowing which podcast I'm on here, but the idea was I didn't want just more money. The money is easy. I was looking for a partner, somebody that could help hold us accountable, help us grow up and mature a little bit, and help gut check me. Because my intuition's pretty darn good, but it's not 100%. It's just having somebody that kind of helped me level up. There's an element of de-risking, right? So just being able to take some secondary. As I look at when you're running a software company, and I look at some of the challenges we've gone through, we had a near miss with a cyber attack a few years back that scared the living daylights out of me. It's not something anybody ever wants to go through.
Yep.
You're dealing with fraud, you've got employees, there's lawsuits, there's any number of things that are trying to take away your baby at any time.
I also think done correctly, a little bit of secondary gives a founder the right to go big, to swing big.
Yes, because it gets you, it's a mindset.
Yeah.
And the debt helped a little bit with that, but the secondary really helped with that. I was okay, and I'm not alone in this now.
Yeah.
I've got somebody else in the car with me that's, I may have two hands on the wheel, but they're sitting in the passenger seat and they got a little hand on the wheel too.
So right? I think I've told you this, but I can't tell you how many times, I know a lot of growth equity firms. I can't tell you how many times growth equity firms would come to town, and they would come to my office and they would say, by the way, do you know Josh over at RTA? We love that company. It seemed like everybody and their brother was coming to town to talk to you, to get to know. Why did you pick Susquehanna Growth Equity Partners, and what is it about them that you were excited about, and how have you seen them engage already? You're only a month.
Yeah, we're about a month in.
You're only a month in.
Month and a half, yeah. So we were getting pinged, I'm sure everybody does, just you get an email or two a week. And then all of a sudden, I don't know what happened. Something got in the water. It was probably shortly after the debt. Something definitely got in the water where all of a sudden it went from 1 or 2 a week to 3 a day. And just out of the woodwork, and I know you guys were sending over introductions. It was awesome. Our bank was sending over introductions. Everybody was asking. I was kind of whoa, what is going on here? When it came down to evaluating, so some of it was timing. I'm sure there's other firms that we would have loved partnering with. So, and we just the timing didn't work out, or we didn't get to know them soon enough. But there was a few that we were going through the process with. And for me, what separated them was their approach and how they, dealt with founders. Are they coming in? Are they prescriptive? They've got playbooks. You don't know how to do this, then here you go. Here's a process and go do this. Are they coming in and they're expecting your growth to be really heavy on M&A? Or do they want to invest in you with organic growth and they're trying to steer you away from M&A? In Susquehanna's case, They really aligned well. They understood who our ICP was, whereas some of the other investors were really pushing, hey, what do you think about this company? We think they'd be a great M&A target. And it's like, yeah, but they don't serve my industry. And frankly, like, what are they going to add to my portfolio? Nothing. I already have everything they already have. I'd rather just go win their customers on merit.
Yeah.
Probably more expensive. I don't know. Sometimes acquisitions are a very expensive way to acquire customers.
Very expensive.
Because then you got to transition and do all that fun stuff. With Susquehanna, the other thing too, I just watched, some other founder friends of mine go through an exit, and like the big thing that motivated the exit was entirely based on timing. Yeah, and it was like the fund was running out. It's a 10-year fund. They didn't want to roll it over into the next fund, and so the shot clock ran out. Yeah. And they had to sell for significantly less than anything that they would have sold for otherwise, because they had to. And Susquehanna's an evergreen fund. They invest off of their own balance. They have another company that they're an investment group that they're part of, and they invest off of that balance sheet. So there is no timeline. When the number's right, then we're ready.
Yeah, to synthesize a few things you said, and I've observed this about them and other investors too, but they're curious, right? They want to learn about a business. So like curiosity is always an attribute of the best investors, in my opinion. They understand nuance, and they don't say, hey, and they're not too prescriptive, right? They understand, hey, these businesses don't go together, or Josh doesn't want to do it. So like, let's not be prescriptive. We're backing Josh on what he wants to do. So not prescriptive. And then the last thing is duration. Like, you value duration, and they definitely have the ability to go long and stay in a business for probably 15, 20 years if they want to. Yeah.
And I'm not saying that I'm going to stay in for 15, 20 years. Like, we are growing and we are trying to get to a number. I've told lots of people, is like, hey, if somebody were to throw 200 million in front of me a year or two ago, like, that would have been my number. And that was, just because I had an offer. I'm going to go back a few stories here. So Dad had an offer for $2 million from a competitor, a PE firm, right? Yeah. This is back in 2004, maybe 6. It was 2006. And so I got an offer almost 20 years later in 2020, and it was for $20 million, right? So it almost 10x the value of the company in that time. And I was working with Dan Martell a little bit after that. And he's like, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, I don't know. Well, I had this offer for 20, but it wasn't quite enough. I was thinking maybe like we get to 40 or 50. Because like we had done the math, and Ange and I knew about how much, we got 8 kids. So like it doesn't go as far as it would for somebody else, but we kind of knew what we needed. And he's like, why are you thinking so small? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, why don't you 10X that? Like, like, think bigger. What would it take to be a $200 million company? And so I was like, you're right. I want to be a $200 million company. So that's the number I started throwing off to all these VC firms whenever they come around. I was like, well, what do you want to exit for? I was like, you throw $200 million in front of me and we'll talk.
I wish I could figure out how to understand the trajectory of a founder's ambition. I mean, what you described is, hey, my ambition just keeps getting bigger. I want to build something bigger. Yeah. I wish I could understand that with more clarity when we invest, because I do believe, I've seen this multiple times in the companies we've invested, when a founder's ambition expands, like, everybody wins. And it doesn't always expand, candidly. I want to ask you one question, and I'm going to go to my 2 standard closing questions.
And by the way, the 200 million is not the number anymore. So just we brought an SGE. That's a very different number now. But
well, so this is a good segue to my last question, and then I'll ask my 2 closing questions. But what are you most excited about for the future? Like, you've got new capital on the balance sheet. Like, the product's humming. Your retention's phenomenal. Like, your gross and net retention are phenomenal. You got a great team. Like, when you look forward, what are you most excited about in the next 5 years?
I'm excited to see where we can take the product once we're unhitched from Classic. Right. Like, that is just, it's an anchor on the ship, and it's been a good anchor. Like, it's been good for us, but I am excited to see, what happens when we're able to include things that we just can't even talk about right now. Right.
And you think you probably get unanchored in 2026?
Yes. Yeah. Like, 2026 is the date. Like, that's a hard date. We are not missing that date, and we're cutting the umbilical cord, so to speak. And there's stuff we're going to do in the meantime that I'm excited about. So, I mean, like, we're going to get through this year. This year is going to be very heavy on parity. Next year is going to be, heavy on some of the innovation stuff that we can do while still handcuffed together. But I'm excited for what comes after, and just, not necessarily paying down tech debt, but unlocking some of the things that tech debt is blocking right now. Specifically with AI, ML, being able to go and, partner with some of these other companies that have things to offer us, and we have things to offer them that we just can't integrate fully right now. So I'm excited about that. There's a huge upswell in the automotive industry right now. Just a lot of attention being coming towards it, largely because of EVs, right? And we tell fleets all the time, like, guys, this is your moment in the spotlight. You are often the redheaded stepchild. You're neglected. Not anymore. Right now, like, all the spotlight is on you. How do we help you, with transition plans, with making sure that EV is actually right for you, and building tools that enable all that. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, that is a potentially really interesting inflection point in the industry too. So that's interesting.
I'm super bold on AI too, though. Like that's going to revolutionize a lot, and so I'm excited about that.
What's the thing that AI? What's AI going to do most for RTA?
The first thing is just internally, right? It's our own internal adoption of it, is driving down, how much we can produce. So I'm not even like talking about driving down cost. I'm more the other side of it. I want to drive
Speed.
up productivity,
Yeah.
right? How do I deliver more, deliver it faster, and get product out to market quicker?
Interestingly, at least where we sit in the world, the number one thing that I hear from software founders is exactly what you said. It's the internal application of AI, even more than AI in their products that they're selling. It's more the internal
Well,
application.
you got to remember too, like, I got government fleets. They're going to be really slow to adopt anything I throw with the words AI in it. If we were on a call the other day and one of them was like, is that an AI note taker? And we're like, yeah. We're not allowed to have that on our calls. Okay, sorry. So I'm like, man, this is old school. How do we do this? So somebody's going to have to write this down.
All right, final two questions, Josh. If you've listened to a podcast before, you might know what these questions are, but I did not preview these with you, so putting you on the spot here.
Okay.
I always want to ask what someone's most thankful for. I learn a lot from people about what they're most thankful for, but what's something that you're super thankful for in your life?
I would say the legacy that Dad left me.
Yeah,
right. I mean, like, between the company, between the lessons, between him being just an amazing father, I would not be where I am without him. Right. And so I'm very grateful for that opportunity.
I love it.
It's not lost on me how rare it is that I'm even in this position.
I love it. The last question I always ask, I'm secretly curating a list. The only reason I do this podcast is to curate a list of the best places to eat tacos in Arizona.
Ooh.
So if you're going to go eat tacos, if someone comes to town and you're taking them to get tacos specifically, where would you go for tacos?
I probably would hit up, I'm going to tell you, like, Barrio Queen's got some decent tacos.
I love Barrio Queen.
Yeah, they've got some solid tacos.
That one gets called out a lot
here
on this podcast.
I would tell you my favorite tacos are not in Arizona, though.
Oh, no. Where?
They're in Baja.
Okay, well, that's a fair point.
That's a fair point. Yeah, there's
tacos.
A little place down in the middle of Baja. We go down there when we run the trucks. So it's amazing. Best tacos in Baja. So.
I love it. Hey, Josh, thanks so much. Congrats on everything you've built and continue to build. I'm so excited to see the trajectory of RTA and what you build next. And thanks for sharing the personal stories about succession and company building. It's been amazing.
Yeah, thanks. I'd love to be here.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it.